It's interesting that we move on after Christmas in such a hurry to the next event, whatever it might be, without realizing, as I said before, that the significant events following the birth of Christ were the arrival of the Magi and the angel's message to the shepherds, who came then to the place of the birth to see what it was God was doing in and through the birth of this infant. It wasn't until some 27 years later that the reality of this event would begin to impact and affect the lives of persons in ways that would change them and the world around them forever. For we know that Jesus grew up in Nazareth, the son of Mary and Joseph. The scriptures are pretty silent about those years of his life. We know, for example, that Joseph was probably much older than Mary, and probably was not on the scene when Jesus began his public ministry. But when the Gospel of Luke says that Mary pondered these things in her heart, it simply means she was in wonder about it. What did God intend as this birth of their child took place? What would the future be, and how would it unfold, and of what significance would it be for the world itself? And Mary pondered these things in her heart. You know, there should be a sense of wonder as we celebrate the birth of the Christ, even 2,000 years after the actual event, give or take a few. Do we truly have a sense of wonder about what God is trying to do for the world, for the whole creation? Or is it just another celebration of a holiday? We move through it and we move on. This gift was meant to go with us every day after we celebrated the birth. It isn't something we acknowledge with a nod of the head or a tip of the hat and then move on. For we Christians, it is the way in which we celebrate what God is always about in this world. Now, I wonder about the Magi. How long had they traveled? We know it was a significant period of time, for they came from the east and made their way to the place of the birth. We know that the shepherds were out in the field keeping watch over their flocks. And how is it that God somehow speaks to such divergent groups of people? Can you imagine? It wasn't to the well-known and renowned people of the nation itself. It was to folks who were of no account or who came from afar, who somehow had captured the glint that God was doing something in this event. And they came to find out what it was. I am not surprised that the Magi came, because they studied the heavens and they studied all of the surrounding events and possibilities about what God was doing. And they would never have begun this journey if there was not some kind of an assurance that it was going to happen at some place and they would eventually get there. But what amazes me is that the Spirit of God spoke to these shepherds. In the light of the nation and the people, they were nobodies. They were just folks who were sent out to do a task, and it was a simple task in many ways. Just make sure the flock is safe. Now, I thought about that when the angel of the Lord appeared to them, and it says, and they were sore afraid. They were startled and filled with fear. The only thing I could think about from my own past was when a couple of us young guys decided we were going to go to the woods outside of our community and pitch a tent. Now, if you've ever been in the woods at night and it's dark and you begin to hear the sounds of the woods, you are sore afraid. And we huddled in that tent like you couldn't believe, hoping for morning to arrive. I thought of that when I thought about these shepherds. They're just simply out there doing what they do. And all of a sudden that routine is dramatically interrupted with an angel who brings a message to them, which they cannot ignore. Even though they're afraid, they know something significant is taking place. And the message of the angel spurs them to go into Bethlehem to see the place of the birth. I think about how God comes to us. You know, we often talk about we're going to find God. We're looking for God in so many different places without realizing that it's God who's looking for us. I celebrated the life of a close friend this past week. And one of the things that I wanted to share with those who were there to celebrate that life was a phrase from Robert Raines, one of my favorite books, entitled Going Home. And Robert Raines was talking about his own spiritual journey, going through some difficult times and coming to himself, much as the Apostle Paul had to come to himself and not simply repeat the patterns of his family's past, but let God work a new thing in him. And Robert Raines, as he was trying to put words to his own spiritual journey, said, "It's not so much that I trusted in God as it is that God trusted in me. It's not so much that I loved God as it is that God loved me." Friends, if we can get out of our own way long enough to let God break in upon our lives in such a way that we really truly hear the message, it should come to us as somehow God breaking in upon the routines of our daily existence, so that we have a sense of the awe and wonder of what God is always at work trying to do in us. Those shepherds weren't expecting this. I'm sometimes afraid that we don't expect it either, because we just go through the motions. The shepherds did what shepherds do. They took the flock to a place of safety at night, and in the day they took the flock out to feed it. Their routine was established. And how many of us have routines that are established? We do what we do, is the way we phrase it. And in the midst of all of that, there is the possibility that God is going to interrupt that in some way to make us aware that there is a significant thing that God is trying to do in us, for us, on our behalf. The angel who spoke to the shepherds made such an impression that they simply couldn't go back and gather around the fire without taking some action. And friends, I think that's the way God breaks in upon our lives, our routines. But who are we? How significant are we in the great scope of things? We sometimes say to us, well, I'm only one person, what can I do? And we use that as a kind of a mantra to say that we can't make any difference anyway, so why bother? But somehow every person counts with God. We have no idea what we are capable of accomplishing until the Spirit of the living God speaks a word to us. And if we are open to what that word is saying to us, life will never be the same. I don't know, where did God find you? Where does God find the shepherds of the world? Where does God speak a word to folks who aren't expecting it? And all of a sudden, there's something dramatic that takes place and their lives take a whole new direction. I believe that's the way God is at work in our world. Sometimes when we least expect it, sometimes when we think we're in charge and we're going to find God somewhere. And God says, well, I'll take care of that, because in the fullness of my time, I will break in upon your life and I will bring a word that will be significant and will change the direction of your life. And that's the way God is at work in the world. Sometimes when we least expect it, one of the reasons the shepherds were so afraid, so frightened by what was happening, is that they had no expectation. And yet the prophets had foretold this for generations, that God would at some point take an action to restore and renew and bring back again the whole sense of what it meant to be one of God's people. but the shepherds just doing what they do. So I'm saying to us this morning, go ahead, do what you do. Just do it. But don't be surprised if at some moment when you least expect it, the Spirit of the living God breaks in upon you in a way that you cannot ignore, even if you want to. You cannot ignore it, because God comes to us when God is ready to do so. The pivotal point on all of this is, are we ready to receive it? Because the shepherds suddenly knew they couldn't just stay by the campfire. They couldn't just repeat the routine that they had followed day after day after day. Something was happening that was changing life forever. That's why we celebrate Christmastide. It's why we celebrate what God has done, not just for us personally, but for the whole creation when the babe was born in the manger. And the scripture reminds us that he grew in stature and in wisdom. He was on his way, and he began his ministry and touched countless lives with a new beginning. That's what God can and will do. As content as we might be with whatever the day may bring, we should not be surprised, but we are, that God is going to speak a word to each one of us. It will bring to us new life, new understanding, new insight, even new purpose. May that be the way we receive and celebrate the birth of the Christ. God comes to us, and God is with us. That is the gospel message of Christmas time. God with us, you and me. And God will speak a word to us as our lives unfold day by day by day. Be open, be ready, and even if you are, you'll still be surprised, because God has a way of speaking to us sometimes in the moment we least expect it. But God will come to us and does come to us. Amen.